Hey guys! So, if you can't tell the title of the video, I've decided to try and make a game for some particular reason. I don't really know. But before I get started, just know I don't have the most experience in games, but I know enough about coding and stuff to get me started on the game. But we can see where it goes from here, I guess. Okay, here we are in Game Maker. So, my thought of the game would be just kind of like, it's not going to be like a full game, it's just more like of a little test kind of thing. So it'll be kind of like 2D Minecraft, but not really with a player, just with, you just place blocks and stuff for now. We can add a player later, but to get started, I'll just add like placing blocks and stuff. Just a quick heads up, I'll make the things first, and then I'll explain how I made them afterwards, just for a quick little tutorial, if anyone needs that. Okay, so what I've done now is I've added just a basic cursor to select things. So you control it with your mouse, and then there'll be blocks on the screen, so you can place them and remove them with just your mouse. So the way I did this is, so we have a sprite called SPR_cursor, which means sprite_cursor. So this is the sprite we have for the cursor. It's just a 32 by 32 tile that it just has corners selected to resemble a cursor. Then over here we have obj_cursor, which means object_cursor. So this is actually our cursor object. So I set the object sprite to be the cursor sprite over here, and then that made the cursor. So to make it follow the mouse, you would just do, well, normally you would do x equals mouse x and y equals mouse y. But because I want it to be like tiles and stuff and snap to the grid, I made this variable here called grid size x and grid size y, and I just set it to the same width as the object, to what the object width is. So what I did for that was x equals mouse x divided by grid size x, but then you round that up because otherwise you get values like decimal values, but you don't want that. And then you just times it by grid size x. And then you do the same for the y. This will then make it snap to the grid. Also, what I forgot to mention is you would want to set the cursor to none, just so you don't have the mouse cursor on there as well. So if I were to remove that and then run the game, then you'd find that, see, the cursor is still on the screen, and then, like, the mouse cursor is still on the screen, and it gets a little bit annoying. So you want to remove that. Okay. That's the cursor part over. Now we want to start actually placing blocks, obviously, if we're trying to make a Minecraft game. I realise this seems a lot harder than it actually is, but I'll walk you through it right now. So, there's a sprite called SPR_tile, which is sprite_tile, and right now it's only got a wooden block, because that's the only block we have right now. But then we have an object for the tile, which then we set the object sprite to be the tile sprite, and currently there's nothing in it. There's no events or anything because we don't really need any. But if we go to the object cursor, now there's a bunch of stuff. It looks really confusing, but I promise it's not that confusing. So let me walk us through it now. So first of all, let's start with the placing. So literally all it does is checks for mouse button 2, which is right click, and if there isn't a tile in the position, I'll get on that later. But if you right click, then it just creates the tile. So literally all that does is you right click, it spawns a tile. Simple enough, that should work. But to make it so you can't place multiple tiles in the same place, because that would maybe cause lag or something, I don't know, there's a variable called tile in position. So that's set to false at the start, but then we check if place meeting x, y, and obj tile. That seems a little bit confusing, but all it means is if, so the x and y is of the current sprite, which is the cursor. So if the cursor and the object tile are meeting in the same place, then that means there's a tile in that position. Otherwise, we just do that there isn't a tile in the position. So, back up here, when we place the block, we just make sure there isn't a tile in the position when we place it. If there is, then this just won't run, so then you won't be placing multiple tiles on top of each other. Okay, so let's get onto this cur tile variable. Cur seems a little bit weird, it's just a short way of saying current. So this variable here is current tile. Set that to 0, because just there isn't a current tile. But basically what it will do is check if there's a tile in position. So if there isn't a tile in the position that you're hovering over, then it will just be 0, so there's no tile currently. Otherwise, if you are hovering over a tile, then it will set the current tile to the nearest instance. So basically an instance, every object has a certain ID when you place it. For example, right here, if I was dragging the tile object to the room, you'll see over here it says instance underscore, and then that would be the tile ID there. If I then paste another one, you'll see it has a different ID. This is because you need to be able to identify each tile from the other, so it doesn't activate all of them at once. My explanation isn't the best, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. So, now all this does is just gets to the closest instance, which would be the one you're hovering over currently, and then it just sets it to that. So that's the instance ID. The current tile has the instance ID of the one you're hovering over, if that makes sense. Okay, now for the last bit of code. If it checks mouse button 1, which is left click, and there is a tile in the right position, so if you're hovering over a tile and you press left click, then it checks if there is a tile. So this is basically doing the same thing as tile in position, but just to make sure, it says if current tile exclamation mark equals. That is just a short way of saying not equals to. So if current tile isn't 0, which would be no tile, so if there is a tile, then it destroys the current tile, which will input the instance ID of the tile you're currently on. So basically the short way of saying it is this destroys the current tile that you're on. I think that about covers it for now. So if I just demonstrate again, right click, you can place the blocks, works fine, and then left click, you can then destroy the block. Okay, unfortunately this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, but I'm sure we can figure this out. So, if you notice, SVR underscore tile for the tile sprite, I've added 2 more tiles, which is stone and dirt, but then there's also a blank one, but we will get to that in a minute. Now in object cursor, we have a few more variables. Max tiles, which means maximum tiles. That's how many tiles there are in total. So let's say there's stone, wood, and dirt, then that's 3 tiles. Then we have minimum tiles, which is always going to be 0. I think that's about everything we need right now. Just quickly, depth equals minus 9999. So the depth is what layer it's on, so like if it's in front or behind the other sprites. So setting the depth to minus and then a big number, that sets it to the very front basically. Because the way depth works, at least in Game Maker I think, the lower the depth is, the higher layer it's on. So if we set it to really low, then it'll be in front of it. Okay, before we have a look in the step event of the cursor, we just quickly, there's been a few additions to the tile objects event. So if you notice, in the create event, there's something called tile IDX, which is short for tile index, which basically defines which tile it's on. So it could be either wood, dirt, stone, whichever one we have. So right now that's 0. Also in the step event, we have image index equals tile index. So basically image index is which frame of the animation that it's on. Because in SVR underscore tile, we have different frames. Every different frame is a different tile. So this is frame 1, 2, 3, 4. So the image index defines what frame it's on. So the frame is equal to the tile index. So basically that just sets it to look like whatever tile it's on. Now in the step event of the object cursor, we can have a look at what we've changed. I actually forgot to mention, tile to place just sets it to whatever tile you're about to place. Now, back in the placement script, when you place it, there's a little bit more going on. Basically, last tile just defines, so if you place one right now, then that will be the last tile that you place. So when it starts at 0, but whenever you place one, it sets it to the nearest object of tile. Because when you place it, the nearest one is going to be the one that you're on. Then, we check last tile dot tile index. So the last tile will be an object tile. And then dot tile index is, so it just defines the tile index of the last tile that you placed. It then sets the tile index to the tile that you want to place. So basically, whichever tile you want to place, it will place that certain tile. Now, down here, we have a little bit of difference. So, if mouse wheel up, so that means if you scroll upwards on your mouse, then tile to place equals tile to place plus 1. So so that will just make it go up a tile. Down here, mouse wheel down, it will do the same. This is where the maximum tiles comes in. So, tile to place is greater than or equal to max tiles, which basically means if the tile to place, because when you scroll up, it goes up one. If it's too far above the maximum amount of tiles, it will just set it back to 0. So it basically just loops around. This does the same for when it goes down, so because it takes away 1, it checks if tile to place is less than the minimum amount of tiles, then it will just go back down 1. Then it will just go to the last frame, which will be the maximum -1. This last bit doesn't really have much significance, but basically, mouse button 3 is the mouse wheel, but if you click it down. So, if you click the mouse wheel down, then, if there's a tile in the position that you clicked, then it basically works like an eyedropper tool, so you can pick whatever tile you're currently on. If there isn't a tile in the position, it'll just set the tile that you want to place to 0, which is the blank one. That should actually be it, but I just want to explain why there's a blank tile at the start. So whenever you place a tile, it will automatically be the first frame. But because that was wood before, then it would be wood, and when you place it, because it changes, it would flicker onto the next tile. So whenever you place a tile, there'll be a slight flicker of whatever the first tile is, which is wood. So if we add a blank tile, then it won't flicker because it's blank. If we go back to the tile, I don't know if I mentioned, but when you place the tile, it checks if the tile to place isn't 0. Because if it's 0, then you'll just be placing air, and then there'll be a blank tile space, and it'll just mess everything up. So, if it's not 0, then you actually want to place the tile. Finally, now if I test this, if I place right now, so right click to place, nothing will show up because we have the air tile selected. But if we scroll the mouse wheel up 1, then it's not visible right now, but we can do that in episode 2. But if I right click now, I'll be placing wood. Then if I scroll up another time, I'll have stone instead. So now we have 2 different types of tiles. And then for the last time, if I scroll up, we'll have dirt. So now we have 3 different types of tiles. Then if I scroll up again, it just takes you back to the air, and then again, takes you back to the wood. And if you go down, it just takes you in the reverse order. Okay, cool. That about wraps up the video. So I hope you enjoyed it. I mean, I did. I got to make a cool game, so I hope you learned something from this too. That'd be pretty cool. But I can't wait to make episode 2, where we'll probably add some sound effects for when you place and break stuff, and also make it visible when you change the block, because otherwise, how are you going to know what block you're on? But for now, see ya.